today we have here a special guest, my good friend, buddy, Joanna Boatman. And I promised her I wouldn't say how old she is, and that's up to her if she wants to say that or not. But she's a good friend of mine, and if you need to know something about Kalama history from the librarian's point of view, she's our go-to person. And she's a wonderful human being too. So Joanna, I'll get out my notes here. Joanna was born and raised in Kalama. She was a second generation, as her mother was also born and raised in Kalama. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. Kalama, she's a graduate of Kalama High School. She then attended Emmanuel Hospital Nursing School. It was in Portland. Mm-hmm. Okay. When she graduated, she worked at Cowlitz General Hospital for 18 years as an operating room nurse. And that was her niche in the nursing field, was an operating room nurse for her whole career. In 1969, life took a little detour, we're gonna call it, for Joanna, and she moved to Seattle. And she worked at Virginia Mason Hospital for 25 years in Seattle. When she retired, she returned to Kalama, and she lives here up on Taylor Road in a home that her ex-husband, Don, built on property that her grandfather purchased in, what'd you say, 1895. So the Boatmans have a long history here in Kalama. She still serves as the secretary of the board for the Cemetery District 5. And if you can catch Joanna around town, she's always busy. And she's a good friend of the library.
Oh, I have a question. What year were you mayor in Kalama?
You know, I can't remember, but I was 28, so I had to been in the late 50s.
Oh, I just had to know.
Yeah, she was the mayor of Kalama for a period of time. And one of my favorite stories is her dad was the chief of police at that point in time, and I believe he said he resigned because he didn't want to work for his daughter.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna turn this over to Joanna and let her talk, and I'm sure that she's willing to answer questions when we're done. So, and by the way, I'm Elaine Bystrom. I'm the library director here, and this program, the Gathering Group, I have to give credit where credit is due. It is largely volunteers that run this group. The librarians have very little to do with it. So, welcome, Joanna.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I got a touch of the old age, and it gives me a little problems once in a while. I never took one of those classes where you learn to make a speech, but I always got the impression you're supposed to tell a joke to get everybody's attention. Well, I don't tell jokes very well, but I'm going to tell you a Marshall joke, a Marshall story. It's a real story. My dad, as I said, was the only policeman in town at the time. Anyway, the way that you call the police in those years is you called the telephone company. They turned a light on the telephone pole. When they saw the light, they went to the telephone company. You walked around in those days, wasn't very far, and found out what was going on. Then you went out to wherever the trouble was. So a Joyce from the tavern called my dad and said, we got a guy here who's not acting very nice. And he said, so we'd like to have you come down. This story shows how into Kalama the Boatman family is. Anyway, Dad went down there, and the guy kind of made a scene and so forth. Eventually, he decided to leave, so he left and came back in a few minutes, and he said to my dad, how the hell did he get out of this town? And Dad said, I don't know, I've never been out. So that's the Boatmans. We haven't been out either. Okay, I usually, I've done this only a couple times, and I screw up some of this stuff, so ask me questions if I get something wrong. But my grandmother came to Kalama by wagon because she couldn't afford anything else, but not by wagon train like we like to see in the movies, but by wagon from Kansas, as did others, because Kansas was in the middle of the, the dust storms and so on like that. So people were desperately poor, and so as long as I can remember as a child, my grandmother still sent things home to Kansas, coats and dresses and things that we couldn't wear. So, but she came here and brought her mother because her mother wanted better weather. I don't know the weather from Kansas to Kalama, but it sure was wetter anyway. So that's how we started here. And then my grandfather migrated from England down through Canada and into the United States. In those days, that was before we were a state, and he was the policeman in town, whatever that was called at that time. And then when we became, the other thing that I think is really important to women is that when we were a territory, we had the vote. When Washington became a state, we lost it. And it took 2 years to get the vote back for women after we became a state.
Wow.
But at least we're early in there. Not as early as Wyoming, but in there. Kalama was a county seat, as most of you know that. I also belong to the Historical Society, which was started by a Kalama woman. And they tell me at the Historical Society that there were 3 hangings in Cowlitz County. We were the county seat, so those 3 hangings took place in Kalama. So I have a picture of one of them here, and I brought it. And there's some other pictures here as well. So you can hand them around or whatever pleases people. You can stop by and look at them afterwards. I don't have to get home. I don't have any cat to feed or anything like that. So the thing that brought people to Kalama in those early days was the Mountain Timber Company. Now I think most of you have seen the new thing down at the port, and it says Mountain Timber. That's where it came from. This is a big operation here in Kalama. My mom talked about it a lot. My mother was born in 1903, and one of the patrons here at the library just told me that the Mountain Timber Company burned in 1911. So it had quite an effect. And if you have noticed that we have a little memorial thing at the cemetery for the Chinese who worked here, and there's China Garden for a good reason, and the Chinese built the railroad for the Mountain Timber Company, not for the Northern Pacific. Don told me that. So there you go. And then there was, of course, fishing. Huge salmon out of the river.
Let me talk.
Introduce
this.
In the courthouse. The courthouse is...
photograph about the hanging. This is the building.
Yeah, the hanging looks like
it's behind it. And this was situated at where the community building is now. And it was a hotel that turned into the courthouse.
Yeah.
So
that was a big fight when Kelso got the courthouse. Okay, so, and the fishing was big at that time. I mean, really big compared to what it is nowadays. And the LaRoys, as I remember as a kid, the LaRoys were still fishing. And Brian says, as a little kid, he still had to make the lead weights that they used on the nets. All kids in those days had chores to do. One thing you have to think about, this is wood country, and it took 9 cords of wood to get through the winter. So you can imagine what we did with our spare time was put the wood in the woodshed, and everybody had a woodshed in those days. So, the other toad-ups fished, and they were at Martin's Bluff. A little aside about Martin's Bluff, the mail came to Kalama, and it went by boat to Martin's Bluff, which isn't very far up the road, up the highway nowadays. But they took it up there, and then they rang a bell to let them know that the boat was there with the mail. So,
Oh my God.
a lot different without telephones. Okay, one of the things that I think is real important if you want to know about history of Kalama. At one point, all the buildings were elevated. The ground was about 8 or 10 feet down, depending on where you were. And there's actually, unless some of the new mayors have taken it out of the books, there's an ordinance that says that you can't tie your cow downtown. But I have a picture of a cow being tied downtown, and there's still room above that cow before you get to the sidewalks.
Is that because of flooding? Was that because of flooding?
No.
Oh,
Well, that was, yeah, the river was quite different.
yeah.
When I get to 1948,
Okay.
I can tell you a little bit about that. That's okay.
Where exactly did this building sit?
That's where the community building is now. A little side about that one, you know, this happens, you have to be careful that I don't talk till tonight. Just stop me. But the community building had this building in it before it was built. When they got ready to build the community building, it had a big vault in there, and it's concreted down, and heavy equipment like we have nowadays was not even a dream, I don't think, then. So they built the community building around the safe, and it's still there. So,
That safe is still there?
oh yeah.
Really?
It needs to have somebody work on the lock, but it's still there.
Where is that? Where is it located in?
It's right in the front of the building, and that's where the water office was. And when we went to the water office, it was the big center of the city government, the water office, which didn't house anything but the water office.
The west door facing the river,
Yeah.
you go in there,
Oh,
there'd be a whatever,
counter.
counter, thank you. And behind, and then you went in and paid your water bill, whatever. And just to the left, there's this great big safe door. It must have been
Yeah, it's big. It's big.
5 feet tall and
Yeah.
maybe more, maybe you
You
could
can
just
walk
walk
in it. You can walk in it. Yeah.
Check it out next time.
Okay, the channel for the Columbia River was on the other side of the island here, and it was moved to this side of the island. And I'm not exactly sure about this, but it's probably as likely that when they moved the channel, there was a lot to be dredged out, and as it was dredged out, that sand had to go somewhere. So when the tide came in, they flooded the streets with that sand, and that's how we got up level with the water. I mean, above the water, 2 feet. That's what the elevation of Kalama is, 2 feet. And so, and my mom kind of remembers that, and I don't know if Carolyn knows it, but one of her relatives worked the dredge.
Yes.
Tommy Woolsey worked the dredge. Carolyn, to all of you, is Renaissance, but she's a coffee. And the coffees are the telephone company.
Yeah, right.
As you know. Okay, I gotta read my notes so I don't get too sidetracked here. Okay, the railroad then came to Kalama, which was a big thing. But the interesting thing about the railroad, it came from Portland to Prescott. I don't know if you know where Prescott is, but it's a little further up the river than Rainier. And so that's where the train came. Because there was no way to turn a train around, they put it on the ferry and brought it to Kalama, and then went from Kalama to Portland. And that's how it got around. At that time, they thought that Kalama might be the future end of the railroad, but they came along and it turned out to be Tacoma, because that was the next move up. So, but it was a big deal, and my grandfather was a grunt on the ferry. Wasn't a big important guy, but he was there, and the train that kind of was loaded in and off the ferries was down at the port, and that sucker is huge. If you haven't been down there, it's just amazing when you go in and see it. Okay. The First Street, I think we got some pictures of First Street. First Street was a pretty busy street when I was young. if you're curious about it, I was born in 1930, so I'm 93. So you can tell when I was young, back a few years. But anyway, that was a pretty important street. It had, at the time, there was a fountain where the grocery store is. On the other side was the bank where the city hall is. And then the doctor's office, the newspaper, and the world greatest junk shop you've ever wanted to go into. I can remember even as a kid going in there, and there was an organ, I think, which was a pretty amazing thing. And Carolyn may remember the Hotts. That's who Mr. Hott had that, and he was one of the older guys in town. But it was a wonderful place to go in and look at stuff. And my mom, well, everybody was poor. That was before, right after the Depression. So everybody went to junk shops and whatever else kind of, we didn't call them antique shops. They're secondhand stores. And so we went there, and we didn't have, we went to rummage sales. We didn't have things in the garage or stuff like that. We had rummage sales. And Saturday, if my dad stayed awake long enough, we got to go to Longview, and then we could go to the rummage sale while he slept in the car. See, what else? I told you about the...
You mentioned the other side of the...
Yeah, on the other side. Before... I don't remember it, and I'm sure that Brian doesn't either, because I'm older, quite a bit older than Brian. But there was a pool hall or tavern. Kalama had their share of pool halls, like everybody else did in those days. And there was that and the telephone company. Carolyn, to you, Reynolson, to me, Coffee, grandfather and grandmother started the telephone company. That, and they say central, well, that one was central to everything. My dad, like I told you, had to go to the phone company if the light went on a telephone pole. If we had a fire, they had to ring the fire bell, the siren. They had a bell, once, a huge bell. It's down by the fire station. $85 paid for that bell. Can you believe that? It's a magnificent piece of antique. But anyway, it's a beautiful thing. So the telephone company was there, and it was raised up high, as it was during the flood. But also on First Street was a hotel, and we have pictures of that. The hotel sat someplace in this area. It was still there when I was a kid, but my mom said that hotel was moved 3 times. That's a 3-story hotel, and that had to be with horses. There was nothing else to move something that big. So imagine that with those guys moving those logs that it's rolled on to the next move and moving that hotel 3 times down the street. But anyway, I think it was torn down about the same time. There was the theater. There was a theater, and on top of that, it was a lodge hall, and that's where the pharmacy is. And that's where we went to the movies. And the ladies were marching upstairs. Brian's mother and my mother and Mrs. What you call was playing the piano, plunk, 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 and we're trying to watch the movie. But it was normal, that's the way it was. We didn't think much of it, except we had a good time. And if you were one of the guys and a lot more brave than I was, you went down the side and you could sneak in to the theater. And we had a guy in town, Eno Pietola. Ano was about, I don't know how tall he was a lot shorter than me. Anyway, he was dwarfed, and he had little hands. and he could go up to the money thing and put his hand up and give him his dime and get in for a dime because he was so short they couldn't figure out how old he was. And we were getting in for a dime and we were in grade school. So anyway, it was kind of a fun thing, and thought it was pretty cool that he was able to pull that stunt. We talked about everybody volunteered for everything. You had to. There wasn't any other way to get it done. And the fire department was volunteer. I mean, really volunteer, not like part of it is today. Everybody volunteered. And Brian's dad, my brother, my nephew, Carolyn's dad. I don't remember that Ron belonged, but he was busy with the phone company. So it was just a normal thing. And this was the trucks were parked about where we are now. We had a little jail over there with a couple of cells, and on this side it was a big party room, and they had a lot of really nice affairs, and everybody celebrated everything. And Don Murs cooked a pig with an apple in its mouth for one of the affairs, but I haven't been able to find a copy of that. But anyway, all Kalama people know about it and remember it. (1939) was the Strawberry Festival, and Elsie Huchert was the first queen. And Mr. Huchert and my dad were Oddfellows, and they took care of the cemetery for years and years because the cemetery belonged to the Oddfellows. But Elsie Huchert and then we had to do the maypole dance. I can hardly figure out how to turn on the radio, much less dance. But anyway, I told you that everybody volunteered. Well, if you didn't volunteer, your mother said, Joanna will do it. And so somebody got sick and couldn't dance the maypole, and so my mother said, Joanna will do it. Of course, she had to stay up all night and make me a dress, but that didn't bother her so much because that's how she worked, you know. She only had 4 cows to milk now, I'm not sure. Then 1941, of course, the war, and Kalama contributed to the war in every way that everybody else did. Things were rationed, the men were gone. My brother started delivering groceries when he was about 14 or 15 because there were no older kids around. In high school, I was in 7th grade. I was 11 years old, and we had assembly meetings, and the boys came to the meeting and then went off to join whatever branch of the service. And some got back and got their degree, their graduation, and some didn't from the war. But it was not an uncommon thing for those kids to go off during the school year and into the service, and I'm sure we had a couple, 3 that didn't come home. A couple other things that you probably want to know about. There was a pottery shop just outside of town, made pottery. And I have one piece, and it has the name of the company on the back of it. And I don't remember it has a date or not, but I remember it as a child going out there to see that. And then later, now somebody lives in that building. They made it over into a home. And there was a dry goods store. And the dry goods store was right in this area too. I'm not just exactly, it changed so much. That street ended before you got to the Columbia Inn. And the Columbia Inn wasn't built until 1952. So things were up here. And the dry goods store closed, and they sold out the stuff in there. Now, I was a kid, And we could go down there, and I can't remember, for 10 or 15 cents, or maybe even as much as 25 cents, you could buy a pair of button shoes. My feet were too big, so I didn't get any button ones. But my sister, I think, got button shoes. So we thought it was pretty neat. You'd put them on with your roller skates and go outside and look like you were really somebody, you know. Kids make out great imaginations. And then, I'll see. I think that the hotel and the Haddam's dry goods store, and then you'll find some of the stuff says the palace or the whatever. That was a theater. It had some things on the top and made it look like a castle or something. So that's what they call it nowadays. But that was a theater, and they had. I think it was also what they called the Opera House before that. And of course, there was the hotel I told you about. And then Cochrane's built the hotel in the early 1900s. That was now the pizza parlor. So it still has some rooms upstairs. So let's see. That thing, Roy Madro is here. Raise your hand, Roy, so they know you're here. Roy, yeah, there he is. They moved in out the Kalama River, and he's got some papers here showing when that was and how many acres of ground they got, and a picture of the family. There were five Madro boys and their dad, and they logged the logs off up there, and they had to get them to town. Now, we think it's easy. All you have to do is go across the bridge. There was no bridge. So they had to build a way to town, and they built Spencer Creek Road. And I don't know if you know about Spencer Creek Road, but if you go to the cemetery, you'll know where Spencer Creek Road is. So, but there's a story about Spencer Creek Road. There was no road available when I was a kid. And because the bridge had fallen down, and it was just kind of wild thing up there. So I didn't ever go up there. Some things girls didn't get to do, boys did, but girls didn't when I was a kid. So I came home after I was working in Seattle, so this has to be in 1970 or so, and they opened Spencer Creek Road. And I came here to the fire station, and I talked to Carl Rudy and Hank Piccone, but Carl told this story. I'm sort of amazed that, Spencer Creek Road is open. And I said to Carl, well, how long did it take you to drive around there? And Carl says, about a 6-pack. So those of you who knew Carl Rudy would know exactly how he would see that. So that was, I was really pleased to say that. Thank you for that. He brought in the story of the Madro family. They logged off if you are up there now and you see all this empty ground and you realize that wasn't that way when they moved up there. And the family logged that off, and according to your history, the logs were brought down to Kalama, and they used those to power the steamship that took the logs to San Francisco or down to California. When they got down there, they had to have ballast on the ships to get them back up here. So after the earthquake, the San Francisco earthquake, they loaded the ships with the rubble from the San Francisco earthquake and used that for ballast in the ships. And they brought it up here and then loaded it in Fur Street. So when they cleaned out Fur Street to open that little shop that's there now, which that used to be the post office, they found this stuff, and then they called me up, what is this stuff in the street? Well, it's San Francisco.
Was it rubble, just basic rubble?
What?
Was it rubble, basically?
Oh, yeah, just rubble from this earthquake.
Buildings and road work, yeah.
I think one of the flood pictures were pretty. It was a pretty amazing time for us because there was no downtown. This building, there's a picture of this building. The water was up quite a long ways in it, And I was working in the bank by that time, and I had hit boats to walk across the street to get some of the papers out of the bank. And so it was an amazing time. Since then, they have built 4 dams on the river. That's why we don't have the high water. Also, before the high water, when Brian's dad was fishing, they could bring their float almost to where the Columbia Inn is.
My family came down the river. They came from Wisconsin. I don't need that.
He doesn't need it.
By wagon, I assume, from the Wisconsin, Minnesota, Great Lakes area. When they got to Oregon City, they sold whatever and they bought a houseboat. And they floated down the river and ended up in Kalama. And somewhere, there's a picture of a flood, and the shore is probably against the bank back here. And the float was out there in the middle of the river. That's how high the water would get without the dams and the support and stuff. But I am told that they brought it in and set it over here on the corner where the antique place is now, and turned it into a emporium or whatever you want to call, mercantile of some kind, and a trading post to some degree. And underneath it was dug out, and the furs were stored down there because it was very controlled temperature until they could ship them out and stuff. So that's how my family got here.
Yeah, I didn't know how your family got here.
I had, my grandfather had 6 brothers and 1 sister. And the sister married into a 2-leg family. And Paul Searles, who some of you might know, but he was a champion log bucker. He could cut a log in half by hand as fast as a guy could do it with a power saw.
Yeah.
And he went down to San Francisco when they opened up the Golden Gate Bridge, and they had a fair and competition and stuff, and he went down for that. But she married the oldest daughter up there, or Hanford Searles, and their family is also still there.
Yeah.
And I keep trying to get in touch with them and get pictures of the births and deaths of the family Bible, and I haven't succeeded yet, but I'm going to keep trying. Anyhow, First Street, the telephone company in 48, there's a picture somewhere with my grandmother with her feet up on the counter, sitting in a chair, and the water right there.
Yeah.
You know. And this, the picture that's going around with the brick building, which is down here at the corner of Fur and First,
Yeah,
that's where the duck came in.
the duck.
The duck.
Yeah, the duck. That's how you got
It's
it.
an amphibious vehicle, had wheels, but it floated. And it had propellers on the back. I don't know if it was 1 or 2, but it had propellers. And that was the way we got to Longview. Yeah, or I don't know if they went clear to, I've heard they went clear to Longview. I've also heard that they went out
Brian,
to where they connected
we
with,
did go to Longview because my brother got sick and we had to take him to the doctor.
right.
We got on the army bus down there, rode it all the way into Longview.
Yeah, so us 4-year-olds at the time,
Yeah.
5-year-olds, remember such an amazing vehicle.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyhow, here's another, as Joanna was saying, the work projects that were done. So here's a big sign on this, and it's the surfacing of Elm Street, which we called, I never knew it was Elm Street. It was a Schoolhouse Hill.
Yeah, it still is.
You know?
Still is.
And if you had a problem, you said, you didn't give an address. Well, don't you remember? It's Mrs. Bailey's house. So-and-so's living there now, but it was Mrs. Bailey's house. Oh, okay. And the fire truck would come, or the police would come, or, you know, for many, many years, the town of Kalama was just one family, and inherited down. Jeannie Stordahl's family lived up on 2nd Street for many years, and her grandpa, Glenn, ran a store, a grocery store, and had his own butcher shop in there. The original butcher
Yeah,
shop.
during the flood, they put
Right
some,
on Main Street,
There's the Methodist
there's a
Church.
house where it's right next to the dentist office now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
What year was this, Joanne?
well, so
That
that
had-
had to be in the 30s, or that
Late
had to be in the
30s.
Late
30s.
30s, okay.
and that one of,
Workman's Project Administration was the WPA. And they built the outside
Okay.
toilets. We still had outside toilets, and they were really nice. We had to all try them.
Really?
If your friend had an outside toilet, it was fun.
Yeah.
the picture that went around of First Street, and as you can see, Elm Street, we're going east and west because everything went to the river. And so the main streets went that way. It wasn't until later when the old Pacific Highway came through. And there's a picture from the south looking at Kalama before there was a highway. And the highway came through, came down the hill over here, went out Meeker Drive, up onto the Carroll's Bluff,
That
the
was-
old Pacific.
That was during the war. This had continuous trails of caravans of guys being taken down to go overseas. I remember coming down, and like I said, I was a kid, but they looked like men, and they were 18, 19.
Yeah.
Hard to believe. You had,
Joanna, did anybody from my family tell you the story of paving Elm Street?
I know that your
But it was Mr. Kramer.
Mr. Kramer had
Mr.
something.
Kramer was a certified engineer, and they were trying to figure out how to keep the asphalt from running back down Elm Street because of the grade. And so Mr. Kramer and my grandpa, and I can't remember, there was another man involved too, I do not remember his name, but they all got together and they surveyed it and they rearranged the grade so that they could actually pave it and the asphalt would stay in place.
You think those things are so automatic, we don't remember.
I don't know what year it was sometime in the early 30s, 'cause
Well, it was a
they-
WPA project, so
Yeah, maybe the mid-30s, I
I don't know.
don't remember.
I don't know. When I was a kid, and it was the Depression and then the war, and there was no in between. So the war made a lot of difference to us, but the NRA that I just told you about was a big thing because people had jobs. My dad talked about having a job where he worked for 15 cents an hour,
Oh.
trying to feed his kids,
Wow.
and that wasn't uncommon because times were tough. And one more thing, during the flood, there's a house down here, just down here a little ways on this street. That house was down across the street from where the community, or where the Columbia Inn is. Now there's a station there and a little coffee shop. But there were 3 houses in there, and they flooded and tilted, and that's the only one they saved, and they brought it up and put it there.
Is
So,
it the one that's right next to the laundromat?
Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering how it's in a
Yeah,
hot place.
yeah, that's how it got there. There are pictures of the houses down there during the flood, and it was. I graduated that year, and my dad, of course, was a town cop, but he was also a fireman, like Carolyn's dad was and Ryan's dad was. And so they were out all night getting people out so they weren't flooded out. And then came to the graduation, and my dad could snore up a storm. So my mother's poking him to make sure he doesn't snore because he falls asleep during this whole thing. But it was, you know, that he wasn't the only one. The guys were up all night trying to get people out. And then we had a storm when I was mayor, and that's when they had the big blow, you know, the hurricane. And they thought there was going to be more flooding, and I got calls in the middle of the night and had to go out and call people and tell them to get your cows out of the way in case the water comes in. Or after the flow, drive around town with the people from the there's the police.
Emergency service.
No, we didn't have emergency service. We
No,
just had state patrol. They came and drove me around town and said, where does so-and-so live? And I said, under those trees right there. One of the houses had 7 trees come into it. That was where the Dickies lived, and you've heard of the Dickies. They took the top of that house off afterwards because, you know, 7 trees did a lot of damage.
Getting back to this building and the fire department, the MAC was bought 1950, the MAC.
49, yeah.
When you see the parade, they have an old fire truck in there, and that's the MAC. And that was the Upland fire truck in Cowles County at one point.
Well,
But-
we had Kalama had a levy for that. And that's when I was mayor. The levy was being paid off that year. And it was, as I recall, it was $20,000. You couldn't buy a wheelchair for $20,000 today. But they had to have a levy.
And that was a lot of money back then.
So,
But as you can see in that flood, this was a bay, and that was a bay there, and they had the MAC over here, and it was always plugged in and charged. So they knew it was going to start when they came. The old International was on that side. And it was important because, well, it took a hell of a deal to get it to a fire because it wasn't very powerful, but it had a 1,000-gallon tank on it. And when you go out of town and you don't have a resource for water, you need all you can have. So it hung around for a long time. And seems like there was a fire up on Mountain View Road, which is up the Kalama River and pretty steep and windy. And they tried to take that International up there, and they had her dad's Jeep pushing on the back and some tow truck or something pulling on the front, trying to get it up that hill.
that's a steep
Did they
hill.
get it up there?
Yeah, but it might not have been soon enough. But anyhow, in this building, right back here in the corner, there was a red phone. And the telephone company installed these in multiple homes. My family had one, Carolyn's family had one. There were the Meltons, the Lindicans, the Dickies, the Boatmans, all had this phone. And it's set right beside a regular phone. But it didn't have any dial on or anything, just an old phone. And somebody would call in a problem, and it would ring that phone. And somebody in this 5, 6, 8 houses, however many there was, would pick it up and say location. And if there was a problem, Highway 99 was out here, not I-5, multiple ways to get on the highway between here and Woodland. Say there's 5 different places, so you could quite often have somebody make a mistake. Anyhow, need the fire truck or need an ambulance. So if they needed an ambulance, there was in that picture, there probably is,
Yeah, the ambulance
shows the,
Came quite a bit later.
oh yeah, it didn't come until 56.
When I went to work in Longview as a nurse, there wasn't an ambulance in Cowles County. So anyway, that's if you have any more questions between Brian and I or Roy, we can probably answer them. Roy brought a picture of the Madros.
Oh.
And there were 5 brothers. One of those brothers, I'm sorry, she told me to get out of the...
Yeah, show it to the camera.
One of those brothers, my mother, as I said, she told me, Joanna will do it. My sister had a little talent, and she wanted to go to the dance. Now, there was a dance every Saturday night at the community building where Daryl Coffey played the drums and Mrs. Bacala played the piano and bounced it up and down. She was fun to watch. And then I think she said Mr. Bacala played the accordion. Anyway, we went every night to the dance, and like I said, I was 12, and it was all right for kids to do that and to walk down the hill and go. So my sister wanted to go to the dance, and I said, Mom, I don't want to go, that's really dumb. And she said, you will take your sister to the dance. So I took my sister to the dance, and one of the Rodbro brothers, and I thought it was Roy's dad, but he said he wasn't a dancer, asked me to dance. Now that was really nice, because he was a man, and here I was 12 years old. And I said, well, I don't know how to do that. And he says, I'll show you. So that's how I learned to dance. So it was a real community, nice place to raise kids. I think it still is.
I do
But,
too.
But it was fun to grow up here, and it was fun to be a part of a family that had been here forever, and the way things are going probably will, because I have one niece who went out of town, and she lives in Hazeldale, which is a few minutes from here, but Bill and the kids were all up the river still, so we're Kalama.
Well,